Why am I a seeker? And what is that I am seeking? If we're here to manifest, why do we spend so much time trying to get back to unlimited or unveiled consciousness?
The veiling of itself is the price consciousness pays for manifestation. Consciousness has to consent itself to veil itself with its own activity to manifest its infinite potential. But in veiling itself, it also veils its innate sense of peace, happiness, and fulfillment. This veiling creates the experience of the separate self, which feels a sense of lack, an absence of peace, an absence of happiness, and a feeling of being separate, isolated, and therefore unloved or unloving.
But why do most of us get fooled into believing we're a separate self? Why are we compressed into a finite mind to manifest and then make the erroneous leap to being a separate self?
It's because awareness must forget itself to appear finite, just as your mind must fall asleep to dream. Awareness has to forget its true nature to experience the world as finite. This forgetting is what creates the sense of a separate self. When we forget that our true nature is infinite, we believe we are a finite, isolated self, distinct from others, and that belief creates the experience of separation and limitation.
So the forgetting itself is the root of the separate self?
Yes, the forgetting is the separate self. When we forget our shared infinite being, we feel like a fragment, incomplete and vulnerable. As a result, the separate self is always trying to complete itself through acquiring objects, substances, and relationships, and it tries to defend itself against perceived threats. These are the two primary behaviors of the separate self, trying to fulfill itself and trying to protect itself. The separate self is like a rubber ball that's been tightly compressed. Just as the ball naturally wants to return to its original shape, the separate self, as a limited expression of consciousness, instinctively longs to return to its natural state of wholeness, where love, freedom, fulfillment, and peace are fully accessible. This longing to reconnect with its true nature drives the separate self's constant seeking, which is why we become seekers.
Is this the condition of the finite mind as well?
The separate self is often synonymous with the finite mind, but they're not exactly the same. The finite mind simply manifests experience. The separate self, however, is a finite mind that believes it is a finite mind. This is the ego, the belief in being a separate self. The separate self is essentially nothing pretending to be something, which is the root of all problems. When this illusion is seen through, and the belief in being a separate self dissolves, finite experiences continue, but they're no longer linked to a separate self.
So, the true nature of the finite mind is infinite consciousness?
Precisely. Consider figures like Jesus, Buddha, or Ramana Maharshi. They no longer identified with being a separate self, yet they still appeared to have lived through their physical bodies. While their experience was shaped by the body's perspective, their minds were not confined. They were like the space within a room, boundless and infinite. Though they encountered finite experiences like everyone else, there was no personal sense of self within them. They understood that their finite mind was inherently one with infinite consciousness. They realized that their true self is the God self. This is why Jesus famously said, "I and my Father are one."
So, they didn't have the same impulse to return to a natural state like the separate self does?
Correct. Jesus, Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, and many others knew that their true self was infinite consciousness or awareness itself. There was no sense of self or limitation in them, and with that came peace, happiness, and fulfillment. The analogy of the compressed rubber ball doesn't apply because they were already in their natural state. They had remembered their true nature. We are all seekers, and every one of us will remember our true nature as the one indivisible, infinite consciousness,